Right now, the world is watching the attack on Iran unfold, with the United States and Israel bombing Iran and Iran trying to defend itself. This is dominating headlines across television, newspapers, and social media. Every hour brings breaking updates, new commentary, and expert analysis. But when war dominates the news cycle, we need to wonder not simply what is happening, but how the story is being told. Because wars are not fought only with missiles and drones and bullets. They are also fought through narratives. Welcome to Ozi Perspective. On this channel, I take widely accepted global ideas, narrative, and assumptions, and I look at them differently. Because too many things are accepted simply because they have been repeated for a long time. So here, the aim is to slow down, think clearly, and question ideas that are rarely questioned properly. For roughly 200 years, much of global flow of news has been dominated by media institutions based in Western countries. The modern successors are large organizations such as CNN, BBC, and Deutsche Welle, which have enormous global influence because their reporting reaches hundreds of millions of people. And for many audiences around the world, these outlets are seen as authoritative sources of information. But the truth is that the structure of global news is more concentrated than many people realize. Research in media studies show that most international news used by newspapers worldwide comes from just 3 agencies. It's shocking, I know. These agencies are essentially Reuters from London, Associated Press in the United States, and Agence France Presse in France. Altogether, these agencies supply close to 90% of foreign news content used by newspapers across the world. That means that the international information consumed globally begins its journey inside editorial offices in Western capitals. So that's maybe in London, New York, or Paris. Those cities are the center of news globally. Studies have also shown that the flow of news between regions has historically been very uneven. So for example, one international news agency was found to send around 90,000 words of news each day from the United States to Asia, while receiving only about 19,000 words back from Asia. In other words, information has traditionally flown from Western media centers outwards, far more than it has flown in the opposite direction. The distribution of journalists reflects this imbalance as well, because roughly 1/4 or 1/3 of global correspondents are based in the United States. And another large proportion is centered around European capitals, whilst smaller number of operatives are located in Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. These structures shape which stories receive attention and how events are framed. For generations, Western media institutions have had the power to define global narratives, and their perspectives often become the dominant interpretation of international events. This matters when we look at how the conflict happening now in the world is being reported. So the current war involving Iran is being reported through the media system that developed within that historical structure. So different outlets emphasize certain aspects of the conflict. Certain voices are amplified and other voices remain largely absent. But there has been a change in recent years. For most of modern history, audiences depended almost entirely on journalists to describe events taking place in faraway places. If something happened in another country, people literally had to wait for reporters to arrive, investigate, and publish their accounts. Today, that monopoly has been weakened, not eradicated, just weakened. Because almost every person now carries a camera capable of recording events instantly, firsthand. All you need is a smartphone. And the smartphone can broadcast images and videos to millions of viewers within seconds. And platforms such as YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram have transformed who gets to tell the story. When events unfold on the ground, civilians can now document what they see. They can live stream protests. They can record strikes from multiple locations. Footage can now appear online long before traditional media crew arrives. This has fundamentally changed the information environment forever. However, traditional media still holds enormous influence, but it no longer controls the entire narrative. That change becomes especially visible during conflicts like the one involving Iran now. So we get government statements, television reports, and online footages from ordinary citizens. All these sources now compete to shape public understanding. So this does not mean that social media is always reliable, far from it. But the central point remains. The monopoly over storytelling has been broken. And that changes the relationship between audience and the news and the media generally. To understand how narratives shape perception, I sometimes think back to something from my own childhood. I mean, like many people, a lot of what we understand about the world came from films and television. So looking back, I realized how strongly those stories influence my imagination. For example, when I was a child, I genuinely believed that Russia was permanently cold. Because every film I saw that involved Russians seemed to take place in winter. So there was snow everywhere. The skies was often gray and the landscape bleak. It never occurred to me that places across Russia experience warm summers, just like many other parts of the world. And that reality simply never appeared in the stories that I watched. The characters also were a bit skewed. The characters were often portrayed differently as well. Because I remember American generals were often relaxed, affable, sometimes even cracking jokes whilst discussing military operations and bombing cities. And American soldiers usually talk about home, about their girlfriends, their mom, and the food they missed. They were presented as individuals with families and emotions. But the opposing characters rarely had the same depth. The Russians had few personal stories, few conversation about home. They simply existed mainly as anonymous enemies with stern faces. As a child, you do not analyze these patterns. You simply just absorb them. And over time, those repeated images shape how you imagine other societies. If it was possible to revisit and read newspapers and articles from the era of the transatlantic slave trade in West Africa and Central Africa, or the European colonial expansion era, the language often created a very strange impression. In some cases, it sounded as if the African societies had somehow created their own circumstances. And in the case of slavery, that they volunteered and begged to be enslaved and colonized. And it was as if the land had simply just changed hands naturally. An entire population had willingly surrendered control of their resources. This was because the Europeans who instigated the trade in human beings also controlled the narrative around it. The word conquest was rarely used. Instead, you would see softer words, softer terms like administration, acquisition, treaties, pacts. Language reshaped the story, and the victims of these crimes and injustices rarely appeared in official records of these to tell their own story. Because if they had, history might have been documented very differently. And the world might have seen events from an entirely different perspective. That thought experiment tells us something important about the present events. Because the narrative around the cause and reason for the war is being told by the same countries who instigated the war in Iran in the first place, through their media outlets or the media companies where they have influence. And the Iranian perspective is largely blocked off. But ordinary citizens and non-affiliated platforms share their own recordings and observations, bringing more transparency in some situations. This means that now, in moments like this where we're having conflict in Iran, audiences must be careful about what they accept as unquestioned truth. Whether the information comes from television networks or social media, every narrative is shaped by a perspective. And understanding global events today requires something more than simply watching headlines and scrolling across screens. It requires curiosity and attention, and a willingness to question the frame through which events are being presented. Because in times of war, the most powerful weapon is not always the missile. Sometimes it is the story that explains the missile. And in a world filled with competing narratives, learning how to examine those stories carefully may be one of the most important skills we have. If you found this perspective useful, or if it challenged the way you think about global news and media narratives, then take a moment to engage with it. Either way, the conversation does not end here. This is Ozi Perspective. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.